Good morning. My name is Leo Casey. I am the Executive Director of the Albert Schenker Institute. And on behalf of the Albert Schenker Institute and our co-sponsors for this conference on the challenge of precarious labor, I welcome you here this morning. We are entering into some dark and difficult times. Yesterday afternoon in Washington, D.C., a man armed with an assault rifle invaded a pizzeria, shot off his weapon, and terrorized little children and families who were present. He told police that he was, quote, self-investigating a surreal election conspiracy, that the restaurant was the center of a child prostitution ring run by Hillary Clinton and her campaign manager. We are dealing with thought processes that are the stuff of the hallucinations of a bad acid trip.
If the Breitbart guy is here, please write that, okay?
Except that the people who work in this restaurant and neighboring restaurants and their families have been forced to live these hallucinations, subjected to an onslaught of hate on social media with numerous death threats. Except that they are being promoted by people who now occupy positions of great power and intelligence. The conspiracy theory that Hillary Clinton ran a child sex ring was tweeted by Donald Trump's choice for his national security advisor, Mike Flynn, days before the election. We live in dark and difficult times. We have a president-elect, Donald Trump, who has brought to the mainstream of American politics a toxic brew of racism, misogyny, anti-Muslim, anti-Semitic, and anti-immigrant bigotry, homophobia, authoritarianism, and calls to political violence. Across Europe, we have seen rise of similar far-right authoritarian demagogues. What we are seeing shares far, far too much with what we saw in the 1930s. In the wake of Trump's election, we have seen an extraordinary wave of hate crime against Muslims, people of color, especially Latinos, immigrants, and others. Teachers in our union report acts of bullying and violence against students from these same groups have increased exponentially. Last night, shortly after midnight, we received a last-minute registration for this conference from Breitbart News. You should be aware that there may well be someone here today representing them. We live in dark and difficult times. The moral arc of the universe is indeed long, but we gather today because we know it bends towards justice. We know that because we do the bending. Before he even assumed office, Donald Trump has begun the only pivot he ever intended to do, from faux populist to champion of the 1%. His cabinet will have the greatest concentration of plutocrats in American history, men and women like Steve Mnuchin of Goldman Sachs, hedge funder who presided over the housing crisis that led to the Great Recession, Wilbur Ross, who presided over the Sago mine disaster in which 12 miners lost their lives due to multiple safety violations, and Betsy DeVos of Amway fortune, who is set on reproducing the damage she state-managed in Michigan to Detroit's public schools across the country in an effort to undermine our public schools and our unions. The American labor movement, its unions, as embattled as we are the only institutions that can lead the fight against the coming assault on working people. It is up for us to both demand that a real program for addressing the great economic inequality that ravages our nation is enacted, and to defend the full citizenship rights of people of color, immigrants, Muslims, Jews, LGBTQ folks against bigotry and hate. That is the work we start here today. The rise of precarious labor, its spread over the last few decades, is at the heart of the growth of economic inequality in the United States and through the rest of the world. We need to understand the changes in the global political economy that led to this vast increase. We need to share organizing experiences and strategies for dealing with precarious labor. We need to plot out strategies in law, in regulation, and in policy to address it. It is clear that the space that we had hoped would exist in the national government when we first organized this conference has closed. But that does not mean that we can simply play defense. We need to understand how we move this agenda forward in this new political environment. We need to look to state and local environments, to law, and to organizing to make sure that we are able to continue this work and to move it forward. Before we begin, I would like to thank the institutions that are co-sponsoring this conference with us, the AFL-CIO, the American Federation of Teachers, the American Prospect Dissent, the Center for Innovation in Worker Organization at Rutgers University, Kalamanowitz Initiative for Labor and the Working Poor at Georgetown University, the New Labor Forum, the United Association for Labor Education. We would like to also thank the 21st Century ILGWU Heritage Fund for providing us some support. For those of you who are watching us on live streaming, and for those of you here in the house, the hashtag for the conference is Precarious Labor. And those who are live streaming, if you send questions via Twitter using that hashtag, we will try to include them in the questions for the various panels. Without any further ado, I would like to introduce an old friend, dear friend of mine, a woman who I met more than 30 years ago, and who I spent many years in the classroom and in New York City schools fighting for the rights of teachers and for the rights of the students that teachers serve. Randi Weingarten is the president of the American Federation of Teachers. She's the president of the Albert Shanker Institute, and we are pleased to have her here today to open this conference.